Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about a Series 12 story, Can You Hear Me? Written by, I believe it's pronounced Charlie James and Chris Chibnall, and is directed by Emma Sullivan. As you can probably tell, I'm not as quirky as I am usually. I'm usually full of energy and stuff, but I'm decided to calm it down a little bit, at least for the moment, because this story does tackle with heavier themes. This is one of those stories where the BBC put up a thing at the start as this story handles with heavy subject matter, and by the end of the story and the credits rolled when the episode first aired, there was a whole if there's issues that you've had about with this, if there's any issues that you've connect with in this story, please get in contact with people, because this story does deal a lot with mental health. The Doctor goes back in the past to visit a centre of a time which are known for their mental health, which is just a little nod to the fact about the themes of the story. But the story mainly talks about nightmares and talking about characters is worries and their past, and some of it can be a bit emotionally heavy. Now, just actually tackling these things, actually hitting these targets, hitting these themes and ideas is something I think Doctor Who not only should be doing, not only something that we should encourage to do, but I think Doctor Who should be doing. Doctor Who is a show for all ages, and it needs to be it's a smart show for smart people, and it needs to tell stories which can connect to people like this, and I think these are very important stories. However, when this story was aired, many people, not just the silly people, but genuine people, had huge criticisms against this story for how it tackles with its subject matter. Specifically, one scene at the very end. If you've seen this episode, you probably know exactly what I'm on about. It's a very hard hitting theme, and a lot of people criticise this story for specifically that one moment, but throughout the story as well. A lot of people had a lot of issues with it, and is that justified? I mean, of course, the opinions of those who didn't like that element of the stories, they were justified. They were, it was a very touched to home, and how poorly it was handled was very upsetting for a lot of people. But this is just my opinion of the story. So we're going to not take that out of consideration, but we are, this is mainly just my thoughts throughout the majority of the episode, not just one scene, not just one aspect. I will be trying to talk about as much as I can about the entirety of the episode, entirety of the story. So that being said, this is one of the few stories in Series 12, or in the 13th Doctor era as a whole, that has a pre-credit sequence, where we are taken to 3018, I believe that's pronounced, Alop, which is in Syria. And we meet a character called Tahira, played by Othran Gallagher. I believe I'm butchering these names. Very well done, Edam, for butchering these names. And she's worn in this kind of asylum that you got to lock the doors, you got to keep people inside, otherwise they're going to be after you, they're going to attack and kill. Because I've seen these things, or at least I get the sense that something really bad's going to happen. And she's talking to the leader of this asylum, and she's like, I believe that you believe that this is real, so okay, I'll do it. And then it goes into the night, and she hasn't done it. She basically just didn't listen to her because, it's a part of an over imagination. However, suddenly we start hearing people scream and shouting, and things get toppled over, as this claw hand figure grabs onto the leader of the asylum and seemingly takes her and kills her, leading into the opening credits. Really, it's a really great way to start a story. My main issue is when you actually get into the story as a whole. This element, this aspect of the story, is not a huge part of the story, and this element of the story feels really out of place for the rest of the story, because apart from these scenes that are set in 1380, the story is mainly set in modern day Sheffield. The Doctor takes them all back to their home, whilst all our characters basically split up and thing. Yaz seems to be distressed over the fact that they are a few minutes or hours late, because she's late for this anniversary thing, which we will get on later on in the episode. Graham goes to meet his friend, and so does Ryan. He goes to meet his friend, who seems a bit off. He's a character who previously appeared as like an extra in Spyfall. I think you see him like once. One of the criticisms with this story, and is that we don't really get, like, the story really heavily relies on our relationship with this character, and mainly like his relationship with Ryan. But we've only seen it from this point when these emotional hits start to happen to these characters. So when Ryan goes into his flat and sees that there's this mess, and he's like, "Mate, you're usually quite tidy. This is not you." It's a missed opportunity to have the audience previously introduced to this character, and we learn then like what he usually like, and then have these different shapes and personality be effective in the story. As it comes off, it just generally feels like a one-off character. If it wasn't for the fact that he was like an extra, he's only in like a second in Spyfall. Like, we don't have an emotional connection to this character before this action, before these events take place. He basically mentions to Ryan that he's having nightmares about this man, this bald man, tattooed man, in his nightmares. But now recently he's been seeing him in real life. He's been seeing him on the street and in his house. And he asks Ryan to sleep over. Whilst Graham is out with his friends, and his two friends playing cards, and he starts getting this vision of this woman seemingly trapped in a prison between two planets, seemingly colliding each other with this massive energy flow. And Yaz starts having these nightmares of her seemingly like alone in like a field, just on like a lone road, and there's a policewoman there, and she's having her sisters there and saying stuff like, "You're not wanted, we don't need you," and stuff. And there's a lot of that building up, whilst Yaz sees the bald man with the tattoos, and as well the bald man also appears again to Ryan's friend, and there's this really cool effect where he takes off his fingers like float, and it's really eerie as it like plugs into people's ears and essentially feeds off their nightmares, feeds off their sickness. And so our characters basically, the Doctor bands up after she goes to 1380, gets introduced to Tahara, and she becomes basically another surrogate companion in this story, and then she teams up with the rest of the team trying to stop this figure. And the first half of the story is mainly focusing on trying to take down this character called Zelen, played by Ian Glenda, who previously appeared in the Torchwood story Children of Earth. I think, yeah, he was in Children of Earth. He's also previously been in Doctor Who before. In fact, he's previously been in the 13th Doctor story, more specifically the Ghost Monument. He is that cloth thing that reminds the Doctor about the Timeless Child. He was the reason that we have the plot-heavy arc storyline. So he's easily the greatest villain of all time. And at this point in the story does handle very well Our characters, they investigate. The Doctor tracks it down, tracks this giant beast like werewolf figure. The CGI, I think, looks horrible, but some of the eerie shots, like that shot where it's like up on the up on the roof, is really striking, and I do and that claw bit at the start. Emma Sullivan's directing here is absolutely top notch. She really gives out a sort of danger to certain of these scenes, and the Doctor tried to track with Graham into his mind to try and find where these two planets are, and tries to get this psychic connection to like a location, and they use the TARDIS telepathic circuits, which I believe hasn't been seen since, if I remember correctly, Death in Heaven, Dark Water. One of those two episodes with the 12th Doctor. So that's really cool and some fun continuity there. One of the big things I think was really issued with this story is that element in the past in 1318 Syria. Like, why was that part of this story? Usually, and like, especially in the 13th Doctor, you go in the past and explore, and you learn about the culture and the society. However, because that element is just kind of a backdrop into certain scenes in this story, just to connect it to this one character who I really don't understand why she's there. Story-wise, she does nothing. She could have been set in modern day. They could have had her as a civilian in Sheffield, and the story wouldn't be any different. In fact, it would have been better because you would have had more focus on the Sheffield setting, as well as you can use that 1318 Ellipse and I can't get my words out. Syria, and you can use that for a completely different story. I don't understand. There's a very awkward balance, and the Doctor uses it we quickly learn that her nightmares are these werewolf beast things, and the Doctor, she's basically there as a plot device to get to the end of the story. But yeah, it's very strange in that situation, and there's a lot of jumbled moments, but for the moment it's really good, especially this idea of this strange creature. There's a great shot at the start when the TARDIS goes all red and the Doctor's just like, what the hell's going on? And she doesn't see that Zelen is in the TARDIS, and he's just smiling as he's just he sees this person, this target. When you watch it for the first time, you're like, why do that? That's a really strange scene. If the Doctor just turned around any second, he would have been spotted and stuff like that. But when you learn later down the line that she was targeted, absolutely brilliant. The Doctor tracks Graham's dream of this woman to a space station in the far distant future on the outskirts of society. Essentially where they are, there's no society anymore, at least not for decades or thousands and thousands of years. But there is this station which is monitoring these two planets being basically crushed together at the end of collapse, a chaotic event, but something's stopping it, and inside, in the middle between them, is a shell, a prison where Graham's dream woman comes in, and we learn that Zelen has been using these machines, feeding these fingery nightmares into the computer and feeding it to that prison, presumably to defend it, presumably to keep that girl from the inside, because the Doctor theorizes that girl is probably someone who can stop Zelen, and that's why she's in there, and that's why Zelen is putting all that energy, all those nightmares into the prison. There's a strange moment where the rest of the characters, Tahira and the rest of the companions, kind of go off and fight Zelen, and they all get attacked with their nightmares. Before we get into the nightmares, the Doctor confronts Zelen, and we get some huge continuity heavy elements of the story, because we learn that Zelen is one of the immortals. More specific, like, he is an immortal. For those of you who don't know, immortals have been in the Doctor Who canon since the 60s, with a character known as the Celestial Toymaker, who does get mentioned in this story. These beings who basically live on forever, they don't die. They're basically cursed with immortality to see it all, to the point where they're just kind of like dull of existence. They're very unempathetic creatures. They don't really relate at all to humanity. They've mostly well known for appearing in the 5th Doctor era, where we had the Guardians, specifically the Light Guardian and the Black Guardian, the White Guardian and the Black Guardian, who also appeared in the 4th Doctor season, The Key of Time. So there's this massive chronology, especially as Enlightenment, where they meet an entire race of immortals. And like, they've all basically, the theme about them is that they all have something to keep them entertained. With the Celestial Toymaker having Naya's games, the Black Guardian and the White Guardian, they have this battle to keep good and evil in balance. And the other immortals from Enlightenment, it's that like recreational game of the ship, and that's really and they're basically pawns in a game, this massive game for like true enlightenment. And they are very interesting villains. To see them return just out of nowhere, because nobody's expecting this. And Zelen is such a cool rendition to this canon, for the most part. Ian Glenda is such a great performer. Though he has very little to do in terms of a performance, he really nails down that he just enjoys how much bigger he is compared to everyone else. He's disappointed that the Doctor is so much more weaker. He loves humanity because they're fragile creatures with all these nightmares. They're self-destructive. Nobody hates humans more than humans hate themselves, as he talks about their nightmares, about how they're unsure of themselves. They have so much doubt, so much hatred for themselves. And then the Doctor's like, right, I'm going to stop you because I've just stopped your energy circuits taking that prison, and we have released that girl you've kept prisoner. To which Zelen is like, no, you haven't defeated me. In fact, I've used you. You're a pawn in my game. I was trying to feed her. Not the nightmares were to keep her entertained. She is one of the immortals, and she was captured in there by this race. We'll get onto more of that in a bit. And we get introduced to a character. She's credited as Rakira. However, as far as I can remember, she isn't actually named on screen, which is really odd. And she is played by Claire Hope Ashiti. You know me and names. I'm terrible with names. And it's such a strange balance, because it's a great twist that it really changes the whole aspect of the story. This character that they basically was trying to save, the Princess Peach, the princess in the castle, turns out to not only be a villain, but one of the main villains, as she is the one that feeds off these nightmares that Zelen puts onto her. However, she gets introduced about halfway through the story, which is already an hour long. We don't really get a connection with her, and we really have a emotional threat to Zelen, and the fact that Ian Glenda is one of the greatest baddie actors out there, then gets sidelined for this character who, again, I can't remember, but I don't think she's actually named in the episode. It's very strangely structured, and it means that the villains, when she gets introduced, really introduced into the story as the villains, the story kind of delves a bit in terms of the narrative, and Zelen also captures the Doctor and makes her witness her greatest nightmares. And now here is the base bulk of the narrative, because we're going to talk about the fears of our companions, because we get to witness their fears. Mainly the ones, let's go in order of the Doctor. The Doctor sees the timeless child, the element of this child that's seemingly abandoned at this space station, at this station with the beam lighting up. This, of course, ties into the story arc. And the fact that we learn that in Time of the Doctor, listen to me, I'm going somewhere with this. In Time of the Doctor reveals that in the episode The God Complex, which was also a story where characters had to bear witness to their greatest fears, their greatest things that like haunt them, their nightmares. The Doctor, it's revealed, sees the crack in time, which was the story arc of series 5, 6, well not 6, but series 5 and at the end of time. Whilst in this story, which is also talking about fears, the Doctor encounters the Timeless Child. So that means, canonically, the Doctor's greatest fear is heavy story arcs. And I don't blame her one bit. Needlessly, pointlessly confusing story arcs. And the fact that this what I really find funny when you're watching a story is that she has this nightmare. And it's like, oh my god, the Timeless Child, get back into your brain. And then she wakes up and the story never mentions the Timeless Child after that point. Great job, writers. But yeah, let's go to Ryan then, because Ryan, I think, is easily the least interesting. Because again, before and after the nightmare scene, it doesn't really get tackled upon, even throughout the series. Essentially, he sees his friend who's gone old in his nightmare, and it's like, you've abandoned us, you've left us for dead, the whole world's on fire. And then he starts seeing the dregs from the story Orphan 55, which we've talked about earlier in the marathon. Like, I get the idea that like he's afraid that like humanity will be corrupted and polluted, and there's this horrible future waiting out for humanity. It's a great like fear. I would have really worked well as a character theme and a character beat. But apart from this one scene, never brought up. It's a colossal waste. The two other companions, however, Yaz and Graham, their nightmares do actually connect with the story of some sort. At least they seem very separated to the threat, but the nightmares play into a much larger cohesive narrative in the story. Yaz sees herself abandoned on this road as this policewoman. Basically, it's like your family are worried about you, your sister's called up to you. What are you planning to do? Run away or do something stupid? And essentially, we've learned that 3 years ago, I can't remember if it's 3 years prior to meeting the Doctor or 3 years from this point, Yaz went through some really difficult times. Maybe she was bullied at school. Maybe she just wasn't connecting with her family. But she didn't want to be there. And she was planning on running away. The story hints that she was thinking about taking her own life. Now, this is something which I think, like, narrative and in the context of being emotionally mature, works really well. Yaz is a character which, when you rewatch her stories with this information, this is like sort of hints there. She's usually like really narratively focused towards the Doctor. She rarely leaves her side, and when she does, it's so that she can like really prove to herself. She has clearly some attachment issues in certain. There's a great moment I mentioned before. I can't remember what story it is. I think it's Can You Hear Me, where the characters, like, they witness something that might be dangerous, and Ryan is just like, oh yeah, it could be nothing. But Yaz is like towards Doctor's like, we cannot leave, we gotta help. Oh no, it was kablam. With this context, it really works well for her character and makes her a lot more interesting than she was. The story, I think, also really handles this element very maturely, very well. The fact it's not really like, nobody actually says why she left, but you get that feeling and impression. And Mandip Gill's performance in these scenes are brilliant. And there's that moment where that police officer encourages her by making this really stupid bet where it's like, if I lose in 3 years' time, you come back and find me, and if you hated your life, if you think it was absolutely worthless, because this is just a moment, it could just be a moment. So in 3 years' time, if I'm wrong and your life is still miserable, I'll give you a tenner. I'll give you a fiver. 50 quid or something like that, I can't remember. But if your life is great, you have to give me 50p. That's it. Great odds. The odds are in your favour. Now that sounds like a worthwhile deal. That really hits hard. That really is well handled. Now let's talk about Graham's character here, because this is where the huge controversy starts. His nightmare is really serious. It might have been a bit too strong for shows which kids do and watch, but it does treat them mature. And that is that he dreams that his Grace is alive, but his cancer is back, and he's only got a few hours, maybe like a day left to live, as she's begging him, why didn't you come and save me? And he's like, please give me another try. Bradley Walsh is always phenomenal in his scenes. It always breaks my heart. But this will tie into a scene at the end of the story which really is controversial. We'll get onto that in a bit. Let's talk about the narrative. Go back to the narrative for a sec. That woman, like I said, I'm just going to call her the Zellen's girlfriend. Zellen's girlfriend explains to the doctor at one point what happened. How did she get in that prison? We get to an unusual scene, because we get a flashback, which is unusual for Doctor Who to begin with, but animated. Now, I can't remember who animated it, but it's really well handled, and it reminds me a lot of the Deathly Hallows tale. Maybe not it's not that style, but that imagery that's mythologized. I like how the gods are used as star charts, and you got these planets, and you got these not Aztecs, but these cavemen, that kind of ancient drawing aesthetic. Whilst it's all animated and stuff, it looks absolutely gorgeous. I don't know if Emma Sullivan has any part in that, but if she did, and if she didn't, whoever created that, hands down, easily one of the best moments of the story. There's so many great moments here. There's so many great moments, but it's under a lot of mash. Speaking of mash, let's talk about how this story not ends, because the actual wrap up, that when they defeat the villains, happens when the story still has 5-10 minutes left, because it deals with the rest of the characters. But let's actually handle how this element story ends. The Doctor tricks them to come back to 1380. I can't remember how. It has something to do with that beast, and we learn off camera that Tahira character, she learnt to control that beast by basically conquering her fears. She did all that off screen. Again, what was the point of her? What was the point of adding the 1318 setting? It's so bizarre. It's so strange. And the way the story, it happens so quick. As the Doctor uses a sonic screwdriver to take this orb, which Zelen was using to feed all of these nightmares, the prison and stuff. And she uses it to basically shoot them back in the prison, whilst they basically have those nightmares reverted back onto them. So basically now they're suffering the nightmares, whilst this creature, the werewolf creature, goes into the prison with them. And the last shot we see is them screaming as the creature's right in front of them. That's it. That's the last you see of them. And the story still has 10 minutes left. It's so strange. It's so bizarre. And it's that's not even like really the climax of the story, because the story is more about a character's emotional growth. But like it felt so clumsily handled how like you introduce this character in this setting, and she's only really there to introduce this monster, and then she learns to control that monster by conquering her fears off screen. We don't know any connection between this monster and her. Did she like read it as like a book as a kid? Did her parents tell her? Was she attacked by a wolf when she was a little girl or something like that? Is this like an actual thing from her past? We never know. And it is frustrating to watch. But like I said, the actual like narrative, the fight and the bad guy part, that ends there, as we still have 10 minutes left to wrap up the story. And I will say, apart from one element, The rest of it's handled really, really well. We get more into Yaz's struggle with her emotional, and we see more of that flashback. And there's that scene where she finds that woman. She knocks on her door, and she remembers who she is, and she's like, "I've got a gift for you," and she gives her 50p. The performances between, I can't remember who the woman's name is, but Mandip Gill and those, I generally broke into tears in that scene. Very well handled, very well executed, and really, this story really gives Yaz a huge character boost that not only like makes her a lot more interesting going forth, but it's also something that like when you watch back in her previous stories, it makes it more interesting then. Really well handled there. Ryan, there's a great moment with Ryan's friend where it's like, "You've helped me, thank you," and Ryan's just like, "Right, yes, but you got to do me a favor." And Ryan's friend is just, you see him then talking to people who I don't think we actually see. I think it's presumed it's his family. Like I said, those scenes should have been handled better if they, like, it's not even really the issue with the story. It's mainly as the series as a whole, because this character should have been introduced prior. Because this story was only now like an hour long. Or at least give this story a two-parter so we can flesh out this guy's character. But as I stand, this character was only really here to get Ryan essentially into this narrative. And it really is strong. But in terms of this scene, in terms of what it does for this moment, and like, you know, talking about your emotions, talking about your feelings and sharing it and getting it off your chest, very important stuff. Which then brings us to Graham. And that scene. This is going to be really hard for some people, so I do apologise in advance if this emotionally stresses you, because this is a very emotional stress scene. Essentially, Graham talks to his fear about this cancer coming back. Even though he's got the all clear, he's got this massive fear about his cancer coming back. He talks to the doctor about it. And the doctor replies with that she is still emotionally awkward. And what she's going to do is kind of walk away quietly and then think of something that she should have said at the time. That's such a huge disservice to the people who are massively struggling through this stuff. And to hear the doctor, a lot of people's hero, like, I know she's a fictional character, but, you know, it's still, you know, a very important character to a lot of people, essentially put her awkwardness, her thing over her friend struggling. I get, like, you know, there are like people who really can't cope with emotional situations like this. I understand that, and I think that's what the stories. I doubt the writers, directors, and the actors had any ill intent. I don't think they went out to do this, to do like thing. I think this is just like a odd moment, like it didn't really mash up well. But the consequences of that were really, really poor. Like, the scene basically states that, like, essentially, like, the doctor, like, who has been in situations like this before and has fought and fight and encouraged it, put herself, her emotional, her social well-being before Graham's fear. Again, I understand that happens to people, but it's just so out of character for the doctor. It's so odd. It really just like hits like emotionally hard in a bad way. And what the worst thing about it is, like, a lot of people might have understand this scene if there was like a story, like an element to this. Like, maybe this is an aspect of the 13th Doctor which she will learn to grow from. Maybe she comes back in a later episode and she talks about Graham. It's like, "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you at that scene, at that moment. I'm here now. Let me like make it up to you," or something like that, or something like, you know, something like that. This is the only time that this is mentioned. After the scene, this scene is never mentioned again. It's so strange. It's so bizarre. I don't understand it. Like I said, I doubt our writers had an ill intent. You know, it's at the end of the day, stuff like this, like poorly handled stuff happens. But the consequences of this scene really is just so emotionally damaging in terms of like this sends really bad signals, really bad emotional story. And then the story basically wraps up with a cliffhanger where the Doctor, Graham. By the way, I should mention that Graham is fine with this, presumably. He has kind of like a little laugh about it, and then he just goes on with the Doctor as if nothing really happened. But the Doctor basically, the cliffhanger is that she basically tells them like, let's go and meet Mary Shelley. Let's go and see the invention of Frankenstein, which leads into the next chronological story, the TV story anyway. And that is Can You Hear Me? And overall, this like that scene, the whole thing in 1380 with that character, Ryan's friend, that female villain, that the Zellen's girlfriend character who kind of takes over his threat, but she's not really that engaging in terms of a villain persona. There's a lot of things in this story not to like. However, I also think there's a lot of stuff in this story to like. The whole thing with Yaz. This is Yaz's time to shine. That emotional hook, that her character in the story, like it really like defines her. It's a story which, like, again, makes her character a lot more interesting in the future, and you can like look back at her previous stories and you can feel this element like in her character, even if it's like a few scenes here and there. You really like it makes Yaz so much more interesting, and there's so much great scenes. Zelen being like threatening when Zelen is being Zelen. What a performance! What a great Ian Glenda. Such a great performance. A lot of great directing by Emma Sullivan, and that animated scene, gorgeous. Also, there's really stupid scenes as well. I forgot to mention how the Doctor gets out of Zelen's control after she made the season nightmare, which again, story arc stuff I hate, and like in most story arc stuff, it's like it takes your mind off the story, and then it just kind of like the story gets like, right, you remember now the story arc, now you gotta go remember, gotta go back to the story you're telling now, and it's really distracting. But in that scene, she kind of like moves her hips like that, and the Sonic flies into the hands. Really, really dumb. A lot of stupid moments, but also a lot of good moments. It's a story which I think hits 50-50 for me. A lot of bits I love, a lot of bits I hate. And what I hate about this story, I really hate that stuff with Graham. Not really like with Graham, but that scene where the Doctor lets him down in the most undoctoredly fashion. That scene, Jodie Whittaker is not playing the Doctor. In that scene, Bradley Walsh is not playing Graham. They are actors speaking dialogue written by them. In that scene. I'm talking like they do great performances in that scene. Like you really feel Jodie Whittaker's insecurity in that scene, but when she does that. But like it's written wise, especially writing, I think the story has a lot of issues. It's clearly writing issues in this story, which is strange because Chris Chibnall is co-writer. Like, how, like, what did he bring to the table? So I want to know, like, what did he change in the story from what whatever his name is, James, the first writer, like, what did Chris Chibnall change? I want to know. So yeah, Can You Hear Me is a story which I think, when I first watched it, I really enjoyed. It's only really that Graham scene I didn't like. But the more I watch it, the more stuff I've noticed, the more issues I've had. And it didn't thrill me as much as stories that in Series 11 would have. Can You Hear Me? It's just not that great. It's not something I can recommend. There are great moments, there are great elements, there are great scenes. But there are also terrible moments, and there are also terrible scenes. especially terrible scenes. And this story really like emotionally connects to people. If you are somebody who, like me, really connected to the Yaz storyline, or people, I guess as me as well, who really disconnected with the Doctor in that one scene with Graham. And as well as, all the stupid stuff with, like, I still don't understand why the 13, 18 scenes are there. But anyway, let's stop talking about this. That was Can You Hear Me? So join me next time where we will go to fan audio dramas. We were talking about a story from a particular writer, from a writer who I'm really big and passionate about his work. So this is someone who I've been like following for a while. As we go, and the Doctor and her friends basically become Ocean 11, and they're trying to break into a vault. At least that's what I think it is about, because I've never actually heard. I've been saving this for the marathon. So join me next time for the Collateral of Ivanhoe, and I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!